Hi class. In this video, I'm going to explore the concept we introduced in the last video, and I'm going to add a new construct in JavaScript. So last video, we introduced how you can use JavaScript to access what's on the page. And that process is called accessing the DOM. So DOM, D-O-M, is an acronym that stands for Document Object Model. And what that means is the document is the HTML page. And everything on the HTML page, the document itself actually, is an object. And objects are programming constructs that contain properties and methods. So the properties define like the characteristics or the traits of the object, and the methods define what the object can do. So for example, a car might have 4 wheels, or it might be a red car, right? So the number of wheels and the color of the car, that's a property of the car. How fast it can go, or rather like being able to go and being able to stop, those are actions that the car can perform. So those would be methods. So that's just like a real quick introduction of what objects contain. Okay, and then the word model just means that this is how the code is written. We can write code using different patterns to help us reduce the complexity of like really difficult problems. So for example, in a web browser, you've got a web page and you've got code that's running in the browser. And we needed a way to interact with the HTML elements using JavaScript. So the document object model is a pattern that's inside the web browser that allows us to consistently interact with the objects that are on screen. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Now, in this program, what I want to do is create an even or odd program. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to be able to introduce a concept called if statements in JavaScript. So, but I also want to select the DOM. So let's start off with an input. And this input, instead of making a text input, let's change it to a number. Okay, so now when I run this, I should see an input here, and I can type words in here, but that's not a valid number. But if I type numbers, okay, it likes that. I can press up, I can press down, and this is a number input. I can also set some constraints. So let's set the min to 0, and we should put this in quotes. And then we'll set the max. Set the max to 100. Okay. Now, when I run this, there it goes. When I increase this, it goes up. If I try to decrease it, it will not go below 0. Actually, let's set the min to 1. And when I run it, there we go. 1, 5. If I try to do 200, it will not let me. Okay, perfect. So I have my min and I have my max. Okay, so now in JavaScript, let's go select that input so that we can read the values that are inside it in our program. What I'm going to do is create a variable called let's call it num input, like that. And we're going to go get the HTML object using document.querySelector. And for our search criteria, we're just going to search for the input tag. So this searches for a tag with that element input. Okay, and that's going to be returned to this variable. If I run this, I can just see if it worked by typing the variable in the console, and it should show me what's inside the variable. There it is. So the variable is like a bucket, and I can just store information in it. And right now I'm storing that entire object inside it. If I change the value and I run this again, I can see that it looks exactly the same. But if I type dot value, it shows me the number that's currently inside the text box. If I reduce it and do that again, it shows me the new value. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now we know how we can retrieve the input. And what I want to do now is I want to print out whether or not the number is even or odd. So below my input, I'm going to create a p tag, and this p tag is going to hold the word odd or even. Let's see what that looks like when I run it. There it is. That looks pretty good. Okay, so at the beginning of our program, though, it shouldn't say anything because there's no number up here. All right, there we go. And then now, in order to change the inner text for the p tag, I'm going to have to go get it. So I need to go get that HTML element. So I'm going to create another variable called message, and I'm going to say document .query selector, and we're going to get the p tag. So again, the search criteria is just the letter P because it's going to search for a tag with the P as the element, and there it is. Okay, if I run this, I can check to see what it actually retrieved. And there it is, just an empty p tag. Okay, so now that I have these two things, what am I going to do? I'm going to create a function. So the function is the block of code that's going to run when somebody changes the number. So let's say change num. And I don't need to pass anything here. I can just select the value of num input right here. So I can say, so we'll create a variable. It's going to be another constant variable, n equals num input dot value. Okay, so let's just print that out with a console.log, and we will, let me add my semicolons here, and we'll see if it's working. So let me run this. And if I just change the number, nothing happens. But if I call the function from the console, which is change num, like that, it says 5. So this is the console.log, is printing out 5, and then it returns undefined, which is fine. So when do I want this function to run? It's change num, right? So every time we change the number, I want it to tell me if the value is even or odd. And right now, I have to call it manually from the console. What I want to happen is every time I change the number in the number input, I want it to call this function. And I can see that it's not calling it. So to do this, I can use an HTML attribute, an event attribute, just like I did in the last video. But this one is going to be onChange. OnChange equals, and then in quotes, I can write change num. Okay, so now if I run this and then change the value inside my input, I can see that it is printing out the current value in the console. So if I change it to 12, I can see 12 printing out down here. All right, so my event change num, or my onChange event, is calling the function change num, which I defined down here. Okay, fine, this is good. Now, I can see what the number is, but how do I print out the even or odd? I can access the message, and I can access the inner text, and I can change it to something like odd. And if I run this, when I change the number, oh, there we go, it says odd. Okay, so that's how I can output the the values that I'm looking for, but right now it only outputs the word odd, even when the word is the number is even. So what I need to do is an if statement. So I need to be able to say if the n is odd, whoops. So the variable n, if it is odd, then we're going to change the message to say odd. And then if it's not odd, that means it's even, right? So else message.inner text equals even, like that. Now, unfortunately, this isn't going to work. So you can't check to see if just n is odd. If I run this, it's probably going to give me an error. Let's see. Yep. So unexpected identifier is, so it doesn't know what I'm trying to do here. Even though this statement makes sense to us in English, it's not a Boolean expression. And the keyword is and the keyword odd in this example, it just doesn't mean anything to JavaScript. So instead, what I need to do is solve this with math. So we could say, okay, well, if n is equal to the number 2, that would mean it's even. So let's say if it's equal to the number 1, okay, we're going to say odd, or else we're going to say even. Let's run this. So let me save it and run this. Let me clear that console. And when I press up, okay, look, it says odd. And when I press up again, now it says even. Perfect. This program works. Unfortunately, when I go to 3, it still says even. Okay, so every other number besides 1 is saying even, so that's a problem. I need a way to check to see if the value of n is even or odd, and you can do that with division, actually. So we would say, like, oh, if it's divided evenly, then it's an even number. If there's a fraction left over, then that means it's odd. So that means if I write, if I say if n divided by 2, if I say if n divided by 2 is has a remainder, then that means the value is odd, or else the value is even. Okay, but how do I actually do this mathematically? Because again, this is just English. So while the pseudotext or the pseudocode can help us understand our problem that we're trying to solve, what is the programming code that we need to put here? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a special operator here. Instead of the slash, which is how we do division in JavaScript, I'm going to use the percent sign. So the percent sign is called the modulus operator, and what it does is it does division, but it returns not the answer, but the remainder. So the remainder of every division problem is going to be 0 or something else, right? So I can say n mod 2, if the result of that math problem is greater than 0, then the inner text is going to be odd. If it's 0, it means that it was divisible by 2 evenly. Okay, so 8 divided by 2 is 4, and it has a remainder of 0. So 0 is not greater than 0. Now, 7 divided by 2? 7 divided by 2 is 3 with a remainder of 1. And 1 is greater than 0, so that means that our n is odd. Okay, well, let's try it. Let me run this. And it resets, so now there's nothing showing. Let me clear the console. And if I change this, it tells me that 1 is odd, 2 is even, 3 is odd, 4 is even. And as I go higher, it keeps switching between even and odd. Okay, so this is just a simple little program that interacts with the DOM, and it prints out whether or not our number is even or odd. And we do this by using an if statement. An if statement takes some kind of, we call this a Boolean expression. It's some kind of expression, like a math expression, that is true or false. Okay, so I'm also using something fancy here, which is the modulus, which is an operator that is not commonly used in like regular math class. It is a division is what the function is that it performs, but instead of returning the answer for the division, right? What do we call that? The quotient. It returns the remainder instead. Okay, so it's like integer division, and it returns the remainder. Okay, and then I take the result of that and I check to see if it is greater than 0. So that's going to give us a true or false statement. These greater than, less than, equal to, those types of expressions always return true or false. Okay, and then based on that result, if it's true, it's going to say that the inner text should say the word odd. And if this is not true, then the else clause is going to run, and it's going to set message inner text to even. All right, that's all I have for this video. In the next video, we'll explore these concepts further. Thanks for watching.